I want to call to the stage my friend Alexander Soros. Alex Soros, as many of you know, is the chairperson of the Open Society Foundations, and we have a number of people. So Alex, please just join us up here. Alex, good to see you. Hey, thank you very much. Good to see you, sir. Welcome. I'm trying to keep my mic here from coming off. Welcome to Semafor's little spot on Promenade. Alex, you are head jointly, still with your father, but you chair the board of the Open Society Foundations, which has been trying to, deal with problems, make the world a better place, deal with systemic issues across the way. One of the mission statements of the World Economic Forum itself is solving the problems of the world. And I have been up and down this street the last couple of days talking to people in the corporate community, and under the breath, people say, LOL, how are we doing solving the problems of the world? So I'm just interested in how you think Davos is doing in solving the problems of the world.
Well, I think the world has such a plethora of problems, and the problems seem to be doing quite well. So we'll be back here next year speaking about those problems.
So the problems are doing really great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what is your dashboard as you and, we see Mark Malloch Brown, you've got a lot of the Open Society team here as well. But as you look at the dashboard of challenges that we ought to be focused on a lot more, and I'm always, as we've talked before, interested in blind spots. We get stuck with inertia. Tomorrow we do a little bit, pretty much what we do tomorrow, what we did yesterday. I'm interested in the strategic leaps, the blind spots, and what our agenda for dealing with some of these problems should be.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's pretty clear. And, my father has come to Davos many times, to speak about precisely.
No, I'm so irritated he's not here. Because he gave us every year, what the next big issue was.
It's not personal against you.
Yeah. So, but I mean, he would basically say, hey, China's going to be a big deal. We need to think about it. Yeah. Or, social media platforms are a big deal. You need to do something about it. Or global inequality right before the Occupy movement. So he's called it every year.
So I wanted to touch on, you just said, global economy right before the Occupy movement. But, for a while, when I was growing up, he coined this term, market fundamentalism, to talk about the ways in which, neoliberalism and this unfettered belief in markets could undermine democracy and open societies. And I think we've seen that. And, I think neoliberalism is dead. That model is dead. And I think the challenge, for the Open Society Foundations and for people that believe in open society is, how do we put forward an affirmative model for a socioeconomic model that's affirmative for democracies, that delivers for its citizens? Because I think that if we don't, then the alternative will be owned by MAGA extremists, by populists, by nationalists, and by the enemies of open society.
What you say is really important, and it's not often said in this town. Do you think democracies are not delivering for their citizens?
Look, I think there are a lot of what I would call contested democracies, and I think the United States is one of them, where you have a subset of parties and some that come into power, where as we've seen with Donald Trump, the Republicans, and as we've seen with an attempted coup on January 6th, that are clearly not playing by the same rules and are trying to subvert democracy, from within. And oftentimes, in the cases of Hungary, attempting to try to do this in Brazil with what Bolsonaro tried to do, and in the United States again, are often successful. So I see us living in a world where where democracy becomes contested also from within. With that said, I don't think people are voting or are leaving to go to autocracies. I don't see any mass people trying to immigrate to China and Russia
right.
in great numbers. But democracies need to deliver better. Our old model, isn't
right.
working, and I think we need to own, solutions that respond to the concerns of citizens.
What do you think we largely got wrong? And I remember talking to your dad many years ago, And at that moment, democracies were doing well. You were seeing more and more autocracies roll back. You sort of felt like it was the high point of the work that, of building open societies was doing well. And I'm just interested in that moment where we just intoxicated with how well democracies were doing and got lazy. Did other things like market fundamentalism, technology begin to erode that spirit? I mean, I'm just sort of interested because there was this moment where I don't know, maybe Francis Fukuyama was part of this as well. Basically saying, hey, autocracy have been rolled out. We're at the end of history. We now have essentially the liberal order has won. But what brought the liberal order down? And do you think it's fixable?
So first of all, I don't think that we're here to regenerate, a liberal, or I don't think our goal is to regenerate, the old liberal order. I think, we need to be investing in something new and not for the status quo of yesterday. I would push back on the notion that, that there was an end of history or some march of freedom that occurred in 1989. And I say this, before, I said it before, Putin decided to, to invade Ukraine. This is before, COVID. I mean, I remember, my father coming back from Sarajevo in 1994 and saying the March of Freedom is over and it's been replaced by nationalism because genocide had returned to the European continent. So that era may have lived. Right. But it was done by 1994, at least, at the Open Society Foundations and in my home. But so I think oftentimes we look with some great nostalgia at the times of the past, but a lot of the problems, were there, and I think a lot of them have borne fruit, now vast inequality, not delivering. On securing that there was an equal playing field, meritocracy becoming hollow. I mean, all of these issues obviously played a role, and obviously the financial crisis of 2008, I think was an event that really we're still dealing with the aftershocks.
So in that, what does your North Star become as you kind of talk? I mean, you have a huge foundation, which is going to be looking to you for direction. What's the North Star for navigating through those storms?
So, I think one of the things you notice when you come to a place like the World Economic Forum is everybody can put their solution to the world in one sentence. And I'm just wary of anybody that can put their solution in the world in one sentence, because that means you really got no solution. I mean, so it's not one sentence, and I think each society is also unique. All politics are local. As I mentioned regarding OSF, we have to put forward an agenda that delivers and that's also inspiring. That's inspiring to people that believe in democracy and that believe in open society. And I think that we have to also realize also perhaps that there are aspects of our agenda that may be threatening to people when it comes to issues of identity, and think about that more. But when you think about what's going to be crucial for democracy to deliver, I think a lot also about American leadership, and I think that has shown itself, for example, in the response to the war in Ukraine. If not for President Biden and American leadership, I don't think that you would have this great united response. I often joke, and please don't take this.
Do you think he's done well? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, in many respects, Joe Biden is the coordinating actor of Europe. Right. I mean, and you're seeing all throughout, in this response to Putin's invasion, what it means to the world when America's there. While I think we definitely have our problems, and our legitimacy to speak, as a democracy, may have to be more moderated given the challenges, at home. I think we're doing.
So you see Biden is doing very well at this moment.
Yeah, I think Biden, both on foreign policy and on domestic policy, is actually speaking to a lot of these issues.
Now, Olaf Scholz is speaking today. Do you think the Germans are doing everything they should be doing?
Look, ironically, if we look at the war in Ukraine, one of the last countries I think that will abandon Ukraine is Germany. Europe has made a decision. Germany has made, Schultz talks about the, Zeitenwende, this huge change,
Right.
and while they may not be performing in the same way regarding, giving tanks and in other areas, I think there is firm German commitment to Ukraine. I actually think that it's going to be a lot easier for other countries to leave the to leave the alliance on Ukraine, Britain, for example, because they're less caught up in what this war has meant for Europe. And Britain's under the European Union, so and now Ukraine is an aspiring member. The Germans had this motto of never again and never alone, and I think if Abrams tanks were able to go to Ukraine, if the U.S. is able to pull it off, it'd be very difficult for Germany to stop to not send tanks. Although this time last year, and if we would all be talking about Germany, engaging again in this serious serious military deliveries and in military policy, I'm not sure how comfortable we would be, right?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the interesting things is, I run into Alex all around the world, and oftentimes lately it's been in Eastern Europe, and you can feel palpably the concern about what is happening in Ukraine and Russia there. As you move westward across Europe, it gets more relaxed, more passive. It's sort of more like being in the bleachers and watching this thing go on. And and in Davos, if you're honest, lots of people have learned to say we can't allow Russia to win, we can't allow these things to happen, but you just don't feel the buy-in as much. And I think sometimes it's useful to think hypothetically. And I think if you go back to February 23rd, February 24th, there were not a lot of people that thought that Ukraine would do this well. They thought this would go, and it begs the question that if Russia had prevailed or were to prevail, what would be the implications for the West from your view?
Well, let me first say that I think, and when I speak about the Biden administration doing a great job, I think that, and I'm a trained historian, so I don't like to. Sometimes I'd like to think, longer term. I think when the history books of this, are written, people like Joe Biden and Bill Burns will go down in history as as having won this war in some respects. I mean, the Ukrainians will have won this war because they have shown, even without Western support, they were not going to let Russia come in and subjugate them. I think, if they've taught us one thing, it's very hard to conquer a people that don't want to be conquered. It's very hard to force, Vladimir Putin thinks that, and he should be read literally. He says what he thinks. He thinks that Ukrainians are, and Russians are one people. And it's very hard to force people to love you. And Ukrainians have clearly stated and will clearly keep fighting and saying, no, we are a nation, and this is our national sovereignty, and this is our freedom. And I don't see that stopping anytime soon. I am more surprised at the resilience of Europe and the fact that Ukraine is still on the front pages than the fact that it isn't.
That's interesting.
Because there's tons of Ukraine fatigue. There's tons of other issues. There's tons of other issues. But this war has symbolized so much of what's at stake. And I think to your question about what would have happened if Vladimir Putin would have won, or if Vladimir Putin would have taken the easy path, which is take a little bit more of of Donbass.
A slice.
Yeah, and take a slice.
Slice by slice.
We we do a lot of work with civil society in Ukraine.
And Joe Biden in a speech basically acknowledged he might just take a slice.
Yeah.
And seemed to intimate, okay, we'll deal with that differently.
Yeah, no, and there were a lot of there was a lot of conjecture at that moment that was the winnable that was the winnable war. That would have had its consequences, but and I think that if Putin were to have been successful, and he could, and the Russians are still putting up a fight. I mean, they're they have they have a large population, and they're putting in prisoners to try and deplete Ukraine of its arms. They're paying people and paying their kids that they'll go to college if they'll go into the front lines. They can at least play this into a stalemate. I mean, if Putin really wants to escalate, he can create a Syria in Europe. But if he would have won, I mean, and if there would have been a quick victory, I think it would have been emboldened, or further emboldened, because he was successful the first time around in 2014, which we should never forget. But he would have emboldened all of his allies and friends and those sympathetic to him, that were many in Europe, the United States, and beyond, in their agenda.
One personal question I want to ask you, and you mentioned you being a trained historian. I also know you studied philosophy and political philosophy, and your dad, you would often talk about these philosophers, Popper and others that were really important in his thinking about how the world works. And I've spent a lot of time with your dad trying to understand reflexivity and other kinds of things like this. Do you have some of that in your mental map that is linking your orientation, your North Star, to deeply rooted historical? Because I think that is cool if you do. I mean, it's okay if you don't. But I mean, is there anything like that you've got going for you that's going to be the successor, next generation political philosopher template, if you will?
Yeah. I mean, my father used to get a kick out of saying I'm the failed philosopher and Alex is the successful one. I mean,
I know.
My doctorate's in intellectual history, which is where you study philosophers, but you don't actually partake in the discipline of philosophy. And in this world, actually, a lot of those ideas are contested. I do think that that it serves me well, and I do believe that OSF's mission and a lot of our ideas are baked and delve deeply into inquiry and debate and challenging a lot of our own assumptions and ideas. But I wouldn't call myself a Paparian. I think that one of the things perhaps that is that's different. There was always a critique of Popper that he was about open society, but never really explained what open society was. It was always in contrast to closed society, and that was a form of sort of negative democracy. Habermas, and others.
But your dad did define it.
Yeah, I mean, and I think he took Popper to a different level. But but I think that our challenge is to actually show it working.
Mm-hmm. Right? Well, one of the things I really like that the foundation had worked on a lot. We have a lot of dysfunction in American society, and we have kneecapped opportunity for a lot of people of color, of race, by incarcerating them for all sorts of issues, which becomes, an inhibitor to their success, inhibitor to asset development. And so one of the things on the table has been criminal justice reform and trying to basically undo and unwire, that element of a pretty awful past. You even worked with the Koch Foundation, Open Society worked with the Koch Foundation. For some of you internationally may not understand what a big deal that is. But what is the...
Not necessarily on purpose, but by accident.
Maybe, okay, by accident. Okay, by accident. So anyway, so on the broad side of it, on criminal, are you continuing down that ramp, and are there other elements of historical, social dysfunction in the U.S. that either you're approaching or you sort of feel ought to be on our map to deal with in terms of becoming a healthier democracy and a healthier society?
I took, Monday was Martin Luther King,
Right.
Martin Luther King Day in the U.S. And, I think about last year and how we did not secure voting rights, and that in many respects, our country is less equal when it comes to access to the ballot than it was when voting rights legislation passed in the 60s, when LBJ signed those, momentous bills. I mean, and it's a reminder, a stark reminder, that that until we really, fulfill, that legacy and really overcome mass incarceration, the new Jim Crow, structural racism, et cetera, that holiday will always be a reminder of what we haven't accomplished. Although it also is a reminder of the promise of what we can, accomplish as well. So it's a reminder, I think it should be a reminder, for a lot of us that we got a way to go. Just because we did well in the midterms doesn't mean that voter suppression is not alive and well in the United States, and that there's an active campaign to try and not get African Americans in particular not to vote. So I think that this should not be brushed aside.
You're here in Davos. I'm really interested in what you're hearing on the street. And you talked a little bit about, the concerns about Davos, and once being about the triumph of market fundamentalism. Klaus Schwab is now saying, hey, the world is coming apart, but now we need to reglobalize. We need to reglobalize on new terms, write a new social contract for all this. What do you feel about, and because that has global economic implications, how do you feel about the scaffolding and framing of the global economy here? And is it problematic?
Well, first of all, the one nice thing, about this Davos compared to other Davos is the sense of, I would say, I've never seen this sense of kind of, humility, in the sense of, and critical reflection. It's not at the level that I would like, but,
But you notice it.
No, I think there's an awareness. There's a growing awareness that that things aren't okay, and that even though I'm not sure people's ideals or have changed. I think people have acknowledged that facts the facts definitely have.
And then I'm going to take a couple of questions from the audience, but basically ask you about 2024, right? Back in the U.S. And as you said, Biden is playing a very unusual, important, interesting role globally, but it raises the question of if he's going to continue, what comes next, how the political, environment is shaping up in the United States. Yeah. And I know there's so much we don't know about who the who's will be in there. But we can talk a little bit.
There?
I don't know. Well, maybe.
Donald Trump's running.
Donald Trump's running.
He's the front runner. We can talk all we want about, Ron DeSantis and all these other people the same way that we were talking about Paul Ryan. But Jeff Greenfield had a great article in one of your competitors that
love all our competitors.
About how if you look at the way the Republican primary is set up, Trump should still be seen as the primary because he has the strongest hold on the Republican primary. So I do think that odds are this is going to be Biden versus Trump again.
Right. And what do you think?
If I were a betting man,
and in a way you are. You have the resources to basically help shape. But what are the implications for America in that choice again? Because it was,
existential. And I think that, my political grouping, we need to not be complacent and think that because he was toxic in this midterms that Trump lost not just in 2020 but also in 2022 because of his candidates. That 2 years is a long time in politics,
Right.
and and he can become resurgent again. I mean, we don't know. It's as I said, it's a long time. So, but I think that the consequences are existential. I mean, I look at Hungary, for example. Viktor Orban was in power, and then he lost, and then he came back. And when he came back, he was,
Ready.
He was ready. It was, it was timed, and he knew where the levers of power were. And I think we've been saved, by a lot of Trump's, incompetence the first time around. Some of his instincts as a dictator were right, though. He tried to, is trying to win over the military, and bring them into U.S. domestic, politics. So
Put believers in
yeah,
career
Oh, and he
positions.
will, but he will be on steroids in this one. I mean, it will be if he isn't already. I mean, if I mean, he will, purge civil service. I'm sure he'll go after us. I mean, so I think that that the consequences for America and the world will be, catastrophic and existential, and we can't lose that frame.
Let me ask you finally, Alex. One of the other things I'm trying to get my head around is in the 2022 election, Joe Biden and the Democrats did much better than many people thought they would. And in my book, one of the big issues were the anti-abortion decisions by the Supreme Court. So hold that in mind. We had Mikey Sherrill, Representative Mikey Sherrill, on stage yesterday here with me, and she talked a lot about Ukraine, Russia, and the NATO finding new purpose, the transatlantic relationship being brought back together, democracy and the commitment to democracy being, brought back to life again. And in both of these cases, in the abortion case and this, depended on other things, that these were reactive. And I'm just wondering, why are we unable as a complex ecosystem of what we do to be proactive? In other words, there was a reaction by the Democratic Party to the abortion decision. It was an exogenous shock. There was a reaction to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that brought us back together. But there was, are we too dependent on being reactive to shocks as opposed to sort of having a more proactive agenda? Because I think that's, in fact, what OSF is trying to do, is to be the proactive party to look at. But how easy is it without those shocks?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Had the abortion decision not happened, would Joe Biden be where he is, with the outcomes in the election?
probably. I mean, I think had the Supreme Court, gone maybe with the small, with John Roberts,
Right.
View on the case, would you have had the same? Would you have had the same outcry? Probably not. But it wasn't just abortion. I don't want to belittle that at all, because I think that also it was it hit so many vectors, because it also hit the American belief in precedent on the Supreme Court, and our belief in the Supreme Court as this guardrail and this protector of rights. And how could that not change everything? I mean, people credit the court with so much of of desegregation, and maybe overly glorified it. So I think that definitely played a role. It's going to play a role again in 2024. I mean, especially when you have parts of the country which are choosing which state they want to live in, based off of this. But the other thing that people voted on was democracy. And the fact that a large numbers of Republicans didn't want to necessarily vote for Democrats, because traditionally in midterms, the party that has all three parts of government, two houses of Congress and the presidency, lose. But American voters came out and a lot of independents, Republicans, and said, we don't want these fascists. We don't want these people that don't believe in in democracy. So I think that that says something also about the fact that the majority of Americans, are not where Donald Trump and MAGA extremism are. They're much more tempered, moderate, and and when it comes to a lot of issues, progressive actually.
Great. Well, thank you. Do we have a question in the audience? John Arundel.
Very interested in what the Soros Foundation is doing and what Open Society is doing in terms of the prosecutorial situation in the United States. We have a situation, obviously, where a lot of African males have been, over 2 million have been incarcerated, as you probably know, on petty drug crimes and things like that. And there seems to be an effort by your father to rectify that situation and deal with getting a lot more liberal prosecutors in. Can you discuss that, or is that too prickly of a subject?
No, not prickly at all. Although Fox News and seems to be running a campaign against us as some progenitors of wanting crime in some way. Even though the types of criminal justice reform efforts we lead are crime reducing, and the evidence points in that direction. The prosecutors, the DAs, the Attorney General, the Secretary of States that we support are ones that look for community-based approaches to make sure that recidivism, which is a huge progenitor of crime, a lot of crime is committed by those that have been let out of prison and wind up going back, look for tools in order for that not to occur. And the American prison system is broken, and there's tons of horrible issues that happen in prisons. I often I said during the George Floyd protests, that even if George Floyd had survived and just been bought into the back of that car, his life would have still been ruined. Because of the fact that the barriers of reentry into the society for convicted felons is or people that have been through the
It's a huge problem.
It's it's huge. And it was interesting is that when you put it actually on the ballot, there's a reason these people get elected, and they're popular, and they got elected. A lot of them got elected in this in this midterm. And when you put on the ballot on whether felons should have the right, convicted felons should have the right, or people that have been in prison should have the right to vote again. Even Republicans, say yes. In Florida, it won by, it got 70% of the vote, I believe, and
and then of course Governor DeSantis went out to try to arrest some of these
illegally,
people.
A lot of them, because a lot of them were actually, had other, had the records expunged, but what we saw was a criminal justice system that's not working, that's leaving a large segment of the society behind, and I think until we address it, we're going to keep facing this issue, it's something we're going to keep.
I'll just say as we wrap up, I've been a fan of what Open Society's been trying to do, and I think that testing assumptions is there, but I think on this broad side of trying to figure out what a healthy society ought to be comprised of, not to have opportunities for second and third chances to come around so that people can become stakeholders and be part of the fabric of society is insane. Not to be trying to do that, because otherwise you continue to repeat patterns that are very dysfunctional, and particularly then when you get racism and a lot of other dimensions, it becomes essentially a sentence against people because of where they live, their zip code, their race, etc. And so, Alex Soros, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you have an impact on this village here this week, and look forward to hearing down the road. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks. I look forward to reading you in it comes out in like 20 minutes.
Yes, exactly. Great. Thank you.